Most Americans think the nation's first financial disaster was the Great Depression, or maybe the Panic of 1837. But that's not true, because decades earlier, when the Constitution was still new, when George Washington was alive, and when America wasn't even sure it would survive, the United States experienced a financial meltdown so severe, so unexpected, and so embarrassing that history quietly buried it. A collapse triggered not by stock markets, not by banks chasing exotic derivatives, not by Wall Street greed, but by something far stranger: land. Millions of acres of land. Some real, some fake, and a financial system too young to understand the danger. This is the story of the Panic of 1796 to 1797, America's first financial crash. A crash no one talks about, but everyone should, because the decisions that destroyed fortunes in the 1790s are the same decisions destroying wealth today. To understand the crash, we need to understand the world of America in the 1790s. It was a nation barely a decade old, young, fragile, optimistic, and unbelievably ambitious. But it was also broke. The Revolutionary War left the new country drowning in debt. States owed money. Congress owed money. Soldiers went unpaid. Foreign creditors were demanding interest. Into this chaos stepped Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, a man who believed that America's future wasn't farms and small villages, but commerce, finance, credit, and national ambition. Hamilton convinced Congress to consolidate state debts, build a modern financial system, and, most importantly, create trust in American credit. His plan worked. American bonds became desirable. European capital flowed in. Business exploded. Confidence soared. But there was a side effect. The new financial system made borrowing easier, faster, and more socially acceptable. For the first time, ordinary Americans began to use credit as a tool for growth. Merchants borrowed. Speculators borrowed. Land companies borrowed. Politicians borrowed. Everyone wanted a piece of America's future. And this intoxicating blend of optimism and leverage set the stage for disaster. Because when a young nation discovers easy credit for the first time, it eventually tests the limits. And in the 1790s, America was about to find the limits the hard way. Before Silicon Valley, before Wall Street, before digital startups or stock bubbles, America had a different obsession: land speculation. The United States wasn't just a country, it was an investment opportunity. Millions of acres stretching west and south. Forests, rivers, fertile valleys, mineral deposits. Land that seemed endless. Land that seemed profitable. Land that seemed like a guarantee of wealth. Speculators believed they could buy thousands of acres at low prices, sell them to settlers or other investors, and make fortunes. There was just one problem. Very few of them had the money to do it. So they borrowed, and borrowed, and borrowed. And lenders didn't say no because land seemed like perfect collateral. As long as the land kept increasing in value, the entire structure held. But there was a man who pushed this mania to its extreme, a man whose name you should remember. Robert Morris was the financier of the American Revolution, a founder, a visionary, a man so trusted he almost became secretary of everything. But in the 1790s, he became something else, America's first large-scale real estate speculator, and the man whose mistakes would help trigger a national collapse. Morris and his partners launched massive land companies, some legitimate, others questionable. They bought millions of acres, often with borrowed money, and then used those same lands as collateral to borrow even more. For a while, it worked. On paper, Morris was one of the richest men in North America. But here's the twist. A large part of America didn't actually exist in the way speculators imagined. Maps were wrong. Boundaries were unclear. Titles were disputed. Native American claims were unresolved. And some land companies simply lied. This wasn't just speculation. It was speculation built on uncertainty. And yet it kept growing because people were making money, until the lies began to break. America in the mid-1790s was buzzing with economic energy. Ships sailed between Philadelphia and London. Merchants traded goods to Europe, the Caribbean, and Asia. Banks multiplied. Credit expanded. Land speculation skyrocketed. Everyone believed prosperity was permanent. But beneath the surface, the system had three fatal vulnerabilities. 1. U.S. banks were young and underregulated. They issued notes freely, accepted dubious collateral, and held small reserves. 2. Europe controlled American liquidity. America depended heavily on British credit and European investment. If London sneezed, America caught pneumonia. 3. Land prices were not based on reality. Speculators bought land from other speculators, using loans backed by land they hadn't fully paid for. The entire system resembled a tower built on promises, solid until pressure arrives. And that pressure was coming. In early 1796, the first cracks appeared. A series of large real estate deals, some tied directly to Robert Morris, began falling apart. Why? Because European investors were losing confidence. Rumors spread that American land companies had exaggerated holdings, inflated valuations, or used questionable titles. British banks tightened credit. European lenders demanded repayments. Foreign capital slowed. Suddenly, American speculators had to repay loans they never expected to repay so soon. But to repay loans, they needed to sell land. Lots of land. And when everyone tries to sell at once, prices collapse. Land values plummeted. Collateral evaporated. Loans were called in. Banks demanded payments. This is the moment where a modern viewer might say, okay, but what does land have to do with the panic? Everything. Because in the 1790s, land wasn't just real estate. It was the foundation of the entire credit system. Once land prices collapsed, the entire financial structure began to collapse with it. But the final blow didn't come from land. It came from across the Atlantic. In 1797, Britain faced its own crisis. The threat of invasion by France, massive government debt, and a banking panic at home. The Bank of England did something drastic, suspended specie payments, meaning people could no longer redeem banknotes for gold. This sent shockwaves through global finance. British creditors demanded that Americans repay loans in gold or silver immediately, but American banks didn't have enough gold. Speculators didn't have the money, and the U.S. government couldn't intervene. The American credit bubble imploded. Between 1796 and 1797, land values dropped up to 90%. Banks failed. Merchants went bankrupt. International trade collapsed. Credit froze. Panic spread like wildfire. And the empire of Robert Morris? Destroyed. He, one of the richest men in America, was arrested for debt and spent years in debtor's prison. The man who helped fund the revolution became the face of America's first financial collapse. This wasn't just a crash. It was a national humiliation. When liquidity dries up, what do people do? They sell everything. Merchants dumped inventories. Speculators dumped land. Banks called in loans. Small businesses fired workers. Investors hid money under mattresses. But all of these reactions made the panic worse. People didn't trust banks. Banks didn't trust borrowers. Borrowers didn't trust markets. The system collapsed inward. The government tried small measures, but it had no central bank, no Federal Reserve, no national control of money supply. There was simply nothing powerful enough to stop the collapse. And so the panic burned itself out, leaving behind a trail of ruin. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Because the panic of 1796 to 1797 wasn't a one-time event. It was the prototype for nearly every major American financial crisis that came after. Look at the patterns. 1. Easy credit speculation boom. 1790s. Land. 1820s. Cotton. 1870s. Railroads. 1920s. Stocks. 2000s. Housing. 2020s. Everything. 2. Bad or overvalued collateral. 1790s, disputed land. 2008, subprime mortgages. 2020s, overvalued assets and leverage. 3. Foreign credit withdrawal. 1797, Bank of England. 1929, European lenders. 1997, Asian financial crisis. 2023, rising U.S. interest rates hit global liquidity. 4. Collapse of trust, collapse of system. This part has never changed, and maybe the most important parallel. 5. Belief that this is different. Every generation believes it has better data, better models, better understanding. But human behavior hasn't changed. We chase easy wealth. We borrow more than we should. We trust booming markets. We ignore warning signs. The panic of 1796 to 1797 didn't just happen once. Keeps happening, in different forms, with different assets, under different names. And today's America? More leveraged, more financialized, and more dependent on confidence than ever before. Now let's look at today's economy through the eyes of 1797. Modern statistics that mirror early America. The U.S. holds record household debt, over $17 trillion. Corporate debt is the highest relative to GDP in U.S. history. Federal debt exceeds $34 trillion. Real estate again represents a massive portion of national wealth. Financial markets are inflated by years of near-zero interest rates. And global capital, especially from Asia and Europe, still plays a major role. In the 1790s, a shock in London collapsed American credit. Today, a shock in China's property market, Japanese bond markets, el banking sector, or global interest rates could trigger the same chain reaction. This isn't pessimism, it's structure, and the structure hasn't changed as much as we think. So, what does America's first financial crash teach us today? Takeaway 1. Credit is powerful and dangerous. The United States was built on debt. Debt financed the revolution, the westward expansion, the industrial revolution, and modern growth. But every major crisis, from 1797 to 2008, began with too much borrowing on shaky collateral. Takeaway 2. Confidence is the real currency. Once trust disappears, even the strongest system collapses. 1790s land values didn't fall because the land changed. They fell because belief did. Takeaway 3. Every financial bubble looks obvious after it bursts. In the 1790s, people laughed at warnings. They believed land would always rise. They thought America was too young to fail. History suggests we say the same thing today, just with different assets. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it does rhyme, sometimes loudly. The panic of 1796 to 1797 wasn't just America's first financial crash. It was America's first lesson in a pattern that still defines the country. When credit becomes belief, and belief becomes collateral, America grows. And when belief shatters, America crashes. So the real question is not, could this happen again? The real question is, how close are we to repeating the cycle? If you learned something new today, something that made you rethink America's financial history, then subscribe and follow this series, because this is only the beginning. There are more forgotten panics, untold stories, and hidden financial truths that shaped the country we live in today. And the more we understand the past, the better prepared we are for the next cycle.